Joshua chapters 9 to 11 today, and this opens with someone called the Gibeonites. I don't think we've come across before. They've heard what the Israelites have been up to anyway, and they're rather worried that they're next because they live in the land of Canaan. So they come up with a cunning plan in that they go and they get some tired old sandals on them and put some old clothes and rip the clothes and make themselves all grubby. Go to Joshua and say, oh, we've been walking miles and miles and miles because we're from very far away, not at all next door, and we'd like to make a treaty with you. Joshua, oddly, doesn't check this with God and seemingly falls for this and, yep, fine, we'll make a treaty. And very shortly afterwards, I think it's about 3 days or something, discovers that, no, these aren't people from far, far away. They are, in fact, people from next door that presumably, therefore, were on the list to go and get a kick-in. Joshua asked them why they did this, and the answer, perhaps obviously, is because they were afraid the Israelites were going to come and kill them all. It seems that it makes reference to there were more of these Gibeonites than there were in the city of Ai, which was 12,000 people killed, so quite small, I guess, certainly compared to the Israelites. And indeed, you'd have to say that, that was quite a cunning plan, because it sounds like Joshua's now annoyed because he's promised to God that to have this treaty that he won't hurt them, so he can't wipe them out. So he just makes them their slaves instead. Or they use the word servants. I don't know if there's much distinction between slaves and servants in this context, but certainly it's not going great for the Gibeonites, but it does sound like it's gone better than it would have done had they not done this trick. For some reason from here, it says the 5 kings of the Amorites hear about what's going on with all the Israelites and decide they're going to club together and then they're going to attack the Gibeonites. This doesn't seem like a particularly good idea, because the Gibeonites are now in some sort of collusion with the Israelites, of whom there are bajillions. So these Amorites go, we're going to attack the Gibeonites. And of course the Gibeonites say, Joshua, can you come and give us a hand? So Joshua sends out the army to go and defend the Gibeonites. There's a couple of weird parts in this story, despite the fact there's not much detail. And one of them is that it says that Joshua's army turns up and the Amorites flee, pursued by the Israelites, so they can still go and kill them. But it also says that most of the Amorites are killed by a hailstorm that God throws at them, or more are killed by the hail than are killed by the sword. But it's big lumps of hail, just a bit random. It's a very brief mention of it. And then there's other bit that Joshua asks God, can he delay the sun going down so they can just finish wiping out the Amorites? And it says God delays sunset for a whole day. So, well, yeah, I think not, presumably. I think I assume that's metaphorical, because that seems unlikely. Either way, perhaps inevitably, the 5 kings are captured. They're brought to Joshua. Joshua says he gets his army commanders and gets them to put their feet on the king's necks. I'm not sure if that's some sort of ritual of submission or something like that. And then it says they're just put to death anyway. And then, of course, they're put on poles again. Joshua is obsessed with putting people on poles. It's very, very odd. I mean, I can sort of work with the idea that these are terrible societies, they need wiping out. And they were just attacking the Gibeonites. That's not very nice. So you have your fight, you kill them, sure. But then to go to the extra hassle of putting people on poles, and it's going to be disturbing, isn't it? That's so strange. It then goes on to say that there's lists about another half dozen or so cities that the Israelites go and just completely wipe out, sounding like in quite a short period of time. So this seems like a good point at which to look at the idea of totality of language, because there are some problems in what's said here. There's part of it talks about Joshua kills everybody who breathes, but I don't think that's true, because, well, for a lot of reasons. For Jericho, for example, they talk about everyone who dies, except for Rahab and her family and all the rest of it. And is it really everybody? The big elephant in the room for this story is they talk about the 5 Amorite kings who unite and attack them. But if you go all the way back to Numbers chapter 21, the Amorites were driven out of the land of Canaan at that point, and then I can't remember who it was, but someone else attacked the Israelites, and God said, I've brought these to you, so do to them as you did to the Amorites. And then it talks about all of these people were then killed. So there's a conflict in terms of, okay, that's not doing the same thing if you drove the Amorites out. But the point was they killed the Amorite king back ages ago, drove the Amorites out of the land, but suddenly now there's enough Amorites that they have 5 kings. And there's all these references to everybody being killed. It just doesn't sound at all like everybody is actually being killed. And obviously, clearly, a lot of people have been killed, and far too many people are being put on spikes. Even if they aren't very nice, I don't think putting people on spikes is an appropriate thing to do. But still, there's also talk about the northern kingdoms unite and muster an army, and it's said that they are more numerous than grains of sand on the seashore. Well, I've been to the seashore. There's a lot of sand there. There's just no way that's actually true, obviously. So again, it's just more language saying things that aren't actually true. Exaggerated, so I mean, it's fine. We can take the big picture. But the trouble is, I think a lot of the impression of the Old Testament, certainly from my perspective, pre-reading it, was just that idea of everyone's just getting killed and God's wiping out all the civilizations and genocide. But the more I read, the more it makes no sense that it's actually going into a city and literally killing everybody, despite the fact the Bible literally says literally killing everybody. I don't think that's what's actually being meant in terms of just how people spoke back then. It reminds me actually of something my brother used to do when he was a lot younger. If he and I would go scuba diving and we'd come back and someone would ask, "Oh, did you see many fish?" And my brother's brain wiring was such that there were either no fish at all, no fish, there were a couple of fish, or there were 50 billion fish. Nothing in between. It's, if there were a lot, it was always described as 50 billion. I don't think he does that anymore. I don't recall him doing that in the last couple of decades or so. But that was a big thing. 50 billion was his number, and it's very much like that in the Bible. It's either we killed one person, we left them alone, or we completely destroyed everybody, even though they come back into the story later on, so they clearly weren't all killed. So I think that's what's happening to some extent, which is really unhelpful in the sense that, well, what did happen? The talk of children being killed in previous stories, or rather the young, I should say. Are you really telling me the Israelites went in and just chopped up a bunch of children and women and the rest of it? Maybe, but clearly we've got to take with a pinch of salt a lot of what's being flatly stated, even if it is just straight up, this is what happened. It doesn't seem to... It's not reliable in that sense, in terms of being very sort of flowery, metaphorical storytelling, I guess, in some ways. Of course, I'm not sure that necessarily helps. And just because you didn't wipe out every child and every woman and all the rest of it, you've still got the issue of they've still gone in and killed all these people. And yes, we've got all the child sacrifice and ball and all the rest of it, and that sort of stuff that needed sorting out, arguably. But it does still remain a problem, an objection you can make to the Old Testament. So I think there's still a difficult existential and theological question to tangle with there. But at the same time, I think it doesn't seem that the total massacre and actual genocide that's been talked about just seems exaggerated. And you almost think that the writer wouldn't say, well, I didn't mean actually killed everybody. I just mean that I'm just telling the story. So I think that's where I'm going with that anyway. And we still have the problem, we still have the question, so we'll still address that as we go. Finally, there's one little reference from God that he's hardened the hearts of these baddies who are getting their butts kicked, which parallels up with the Exodus story, that the Pharaoh hardened his own heart, but actually it sounded more like God hardened his heart because Pharaoh changed his mind 4 times. So yes, let them go, and then I'm just kidding. If God was involved in this story, it sounds more like God did that, even though the Bible was very adamant that it was the Pharaoh did it. In this instance, it is saying that God hardens their hearts, so to not let them off. I guess there's a cruelty in that. I'm not sure what hardening hearts involves entirely, but there's certainly no sense of, oh gosh, we've really messed up here. This God clearly exists and we need to repent and we're sorry and please forgive us. Clearly none of that is happening. So at this stage, human life, certainly in this physical realm, doesn't seem to be that important in some ways. Oh, it's hard, isn't it? Really tricky, this stuff. Not boring though, at least. Anyway, we'll leave that one for there and carry on and see what else happens, because clearly there's going to be some more fighting. That seems to be a bit of a theme that we're in at the minute. Joshua just spoiling for a rumble with everybody. And see what we find.